That means you have just like you need to just, if you are a SQL world for the Postgres, MySQL, and Oracle, then it's nothing to need to change it here. Just is simply automatically build the application with the standard JPA annotations. But if you are non-SQL world, the like MongoDB, Cassandra, Redis, Gamefire, Elasticsearch, then you need to be adjust your annotation to fit your backend machines or backend persistence layers. That's very simple annotation. MongoDB, I already had many examples like MongoDB, Cassandra, Gamefires. How can you change these annotation and other things who still would be same as it is, that's into the system, is in persistence layer. Just you need to simply change this annotation, and it works automatically what we expected. So we have defined the user models. You see that the models that it defines, this has a user registration models, and simply very simple. It has a lot of fields. It has a username, first name, user ID, and so on. So forth. It has the pictures of when the user created and the full name, password, and so on, so forth. That means if you see the relationship between the one to many, so that means one user has many roles defined here. So it's a one-to-many relationships here. So you can see, look for this one-to-many relationship. Maybe you have a different ORM mappings, object relational mappings. You can different ideas, concept, but I put it here just like one of the example cases, like the cascade type all. You can create, update, delete for the child and parent objects, and agar types. The pets type is agar to one-to-many related type of standard, very standard settings of your ORM models. So when you define your all the ORM model, maybe you have maybe 15 or 16 classes or 20 classes or 100 classes, doesn't matter. You need to be persist into your object model into your backend server. And for this case, really very simple example, how can you do the user management systems based on the user role and user registration process. That's why I said very simple, and two model domain class, and then these two tables will be created into your backend server database, and then you can do you expose your microservices, your REST services out of these domain models. So we define the domain models that we need, and then we need to define our, how can say, our repositories that we define by default. Repositories for each of the domain models. That's I already explained a lot of times in my last screencast. So very simple, because we are using Spring Boot here. That's we already clear here. So you see the JPA, we have a user role, persistence object, repository object, we annotated repository, we didn't need it, and then we extend the JPA repository, standard JPA repository extensions. That means we can very simple do the CRUD operations, create, update, delete operations. So we define the repository for how many domain classes I need, what we need, and then here also and then that's very simple. So that's one-to-one repository definition. So we have two domain models. We define the two repositories, and very simple annotated repository. We extend that CRUD repository or JPA repository or paging and sorting repository, depending what type of repository. You can also use the CRUD repository. There's also a possible CRUD repository. See the CRUD repository, and even though you can go also the paging and sorting repository. Paging and sorting repository. See, depending what type of repository you try to use it, and then all the possibilities you can do depend. But I try to demonstrate here what we have it, and what you can use it, and then so on so forth. You got the idea of what I mean. Paging, if you need a paging sorting repository, then just use the paging sorting repository extension and implement these things. So we define our domain models, we define the respective repository, the repository models, repository implementation, or extending the interfaces, define the interfaces to extend the other interface, the JPA repository interface, and then you can use it as it is. That's very simple, very standard, and very straightforward. So we defined our own service implementation, just like do the CRUD operation or external other functionalities. See, if I go to this here, you see the very simple interface definitions. retrieve all the user roles, and then you can get on single user roles, and then you can save the user, you can delete the user, update the user. Just simply implement the interfaces, what services you need, what type of operation you need. Just simply do it this way. So this is the standard CRUD operation, very simple: create, update, delete, and then search for a specific ID. Maybe you have any complex queries or complex queries. Just if you need a complex one, just follow my previous screencast. There is a many complex example like JPQL language, and then so on and so forth. And HSQL language also there is in there. If you need a really complex example, in the professional day, we need every time the complex queries we need to use is the aggregation query, projection queries, all sort of information. But here is a very simple case. I try to give it to you. How can you start, and how can you consume the services, and how can you publish the services as a professional, as a standard way of to do. So we define the interfaces. That's what interface, the services functions we need. It's exactly the same things for user registration, and here is the user role registration implementations, the interface definition. And now we try to implement our service implementation. Very straightforward. So very simple and very straightforward. If I open that, we define is a service implementation as a service bean will be generated automatically, and the service implementation impl, you see the standard that implements our interfaces. That's we defined it here. So we define the interfaces here, so we can go this way. So we define the AutoWare, our repository, that what are we define already here, the AutoWare. So just very simple, extend the JP repository, and so on and so forth. Very straightforward. So we just implement our interfaces. That you see is we simply called our repository find all. It's just returning the very straightforward all the users into the backend servers, existing users, and you have a specific user ID. You can pass the specific ID. Find is based on the find by ID. That is pass the ID and get the specific ID. This optional checks is present and put it here. If it's not present, that return the empty object of your results or your JSON. And you save the object, you just simply pass the object and save functions from the JPA repository, and then you see the save function, you pass the object into the your save functions. And delete, you pass the ID and do the delete of the specific delete by ID, and then you have a use update, you pass the object and with the ID, specific ID, and then implement the you delete the update functions of your services. And they exactly the same thing here, nothing more special, the same call. You implement the service class, implement the class, and implement this interface that you already defined here for exactly the same structure. And then you can, and here you can go to the exactly same structure, find all, find by ID, save, delete by ID, and update or save. It's the same, just you can load it, everything into the look for the specific record from the database, this one to call this one first, and then change your editing value or updating value and save the update, and exit the same function for updating, but I will show you later. So we defined our models, we define our repositories that we need, and then we define the services interfaces, we implement the services in here. Then we need the next step. Next step is to release the controllers, the resources publication. This is very simple, very standard. So we have annotated with the REST controller, request mappings, the user role, and then AutoWare, the server interfaces that we define already there, and then just very straightforward. So request mappings, we have the URL path. So the URL, user role URL that you already show you here. So user role is here, and then you have so is this a base URL? You have a port that I will explain you a little bit later. Just concentrate this part. So this is the URL for the user role, and then if you go to the the user registration exactly the same. So you have some user role flags and then the function names or what type of functions, and this is the operator get, put, delete, update functions. I will discuss a little bit later when I release the functions. So it's just got ideas. So this is the base, and then we can request mappings and then get URL and pass the ID, and this is the path parameter, path variables, and then we pass the name of the parameters.